My name is Sue Stoppaker. Welcome to my inaugural cooking video demonstration. I want to make two recipes for you today. One is vegetarian sausages, spicy vegetarian sausages, and the other is a no-knead bread from Sullivan Street Bakery in New York. So I'm going to start with the spicy vegetarian sausages, and a couple questions you might want to ask is, first of all, why make your own vegetarian sausages when they're available? But actually, there are a couple really good reasons. Here is a typical brand of vegetarian sausage, but when you look at the ingredient list, you notice that even though it says it's 100% vegetarian, it contains both milk and egg ingredients, so it is not cholesterol-free. So if you're on a cholesterol-free diet, you would want to avoid something like this. Also, a lot of packaged ingredients have high sodium content, so if you're trying to control the sodium in your diet. The third reason I think you should learn to make your own, well, maybe there's four, because it's really fun. It's sort of like playing. And then the other one is that you can choose your own spices, and I feel that cooking is something that should be unique and personal to you. And if you've been eating sausages in your past, or you have certain spices you love, you can put them in here. So there are a couple ingredients here that you might not be familiar with, and the first ingredient is vital wheat gluten, and that's what forms the basis of this. So again, if you're trying to avoid soy products, many vegetarian sausages are made with soy products, and you can pretty much get away. I have a little bit of soy in here, but you can pretty much get away with not using any. Vital wheat gluten comes from the protein in the endosperm of the wheat berry, and it is a wonderful source of protein and very low in fat. Maybe no fat. I'm not positive about that. So we start with that, and you can get vital wheat gluten in the Bob's Red Mill section of any store or at a health food store. You have to be a little bit careful because it's also called seitan or wheat meat, and I started my experiments with this with the recipe on the Bob's Red Mill bag, and I've renamed that the seitan that ate Manhattan because it's sort of like boiled right out of my pot. So this is a great thing for beginners and for experienced cooks alike. The other thing that goes in here is garbanzo bean flour, which is just ground chickpeas. And you can use other kinds of flour if you want. I'm putting ½ cup in here, but all the ingredients will be listed with the video, so you don't really have to worry about those now. I like garbanzo bean flour because it adds sort of a nutty taste to the product, but you could also use soy flour, brown rice flour. Just experiment. That is one of the fun parts of this, is that you get to experiment and do your own thing. Another thing that goes in here is ½ cup of nutritional yeast flakes, and they are right here. Nutritional yeast flakes are a supplement that are sold in health food stores. They're an excellent source of vitamin B12, which a lot of people who are on a completely plant-based diet really need to make sure they get enough of, so it's a good thing to have. They also add sort of a nutty, cheesy, it's hard taste to describe. You have to taste it first, but there's a depth and a texture to the sausages. So those are the three things I would recommend to start with. And then the spices are pretty much up to you, but here's what I came up with. In order to control the salt content, I'm using, instead of, say, a bouillon powder, something called Spike. And it is a salt-free seasoning. I'm putting in a tablespoon. And this is Spike, and if you are on a salt-restrictive diet, you should try this because it's got so many ingredients, it would take me 20 minutes to read them all, but it's really fun. And it often really takes away the need for salt. So the other thing, and this is highly personal, I like fennel seeds. These are roasted fennel seeds, a tablespoonful. They're often a common ingredient in sausages, but some people don't like them, so you could just omit them. And if you don't like spicy, you're not going to like the 2 teaspoons of red chili flakes I put in here, but if you do like spicy, this just, to me, makes these things great. Smoked paprika is another spice that has a lot of depth and flavor to it. If you bought that paprika for a recipe 4 years ago, you go out and buy yourself a new jar of smoked paprika. I find that a lot of the friends that I talk to about cooking and teach cooking are using spices that really are more like twigs and leaves than the wonderful spices they are. This is 2 teaspoons of ground mustard, and the final thing I have to dump in here is 1/8 teaspoon of allspice and you know, a couple pinches of salt. Again, you could put no salt in here. We're going to get a little more salt with the low sodium soy sauce we put in, or you could put more salt in. You could put a teaspoon in if you wanted to. Okay, so those are our dry ingredients, and what we're going to do when we detach the fork from the whisk is just whisk them together. So we're whisking this together just to combine everything. And then we're going to set this aside and work on the liquid ingredients. I have in this this container 1½ cups of cool water, and cool is important because if it were warm or hot you might activate the wheat gluten and just get it to be really sticky, and that would make it harder to work with. I have 2 teaspoons of low sodium tamari soy sauce and a tablespoon of oil. Again, you could experiment with no oil if you wanted to go completely fat-free, but I put in a tablespoon. Now to that I'm going to add some garlic, and I just want to show you, this is garlic that I bought very recently, and I want to show you, first of all, everybody knows this, right? You press down like that with the blade of the knife, and then the skin just peels away, and then you feed your compost, because that's what gets you all the great produce you get in the summer. And then if you look at this, I mean, this is what you get when you buy something in winter, when you buy garlic in winter. You're really getting the cloves that have been stored for quite a while. And it's got this green pith in it that's not very tasty, and the whole thing is a little bit shriveled. So what I want to show you is that this garlic is completely, it looks a little strange because it's been frozen. But what I do is, in the summertime, I go to the farmer's market, I clean out the stall with all the fresh garlic. I actually grow my own garlic too. But if you look at this, it has no green pith. This was frozen when it was completely fresh. So I just stick them in freezer bags in the freezer and then take them out all winter long. I also put them in white wine and put them in freezer. And when they're all peeled, they're so easy to use. So the only thing that you have to do is walk around for a day or two with your fingers smelling like garlic, and then you have a whole year's worth of garlic. Now, typically what I would do with this is put it in a mortar and pestle, maybe because we really want this to be paste-like almost. But I wanted to be able to show you what it looks like when it's really fresh as compared to the sort of dry stuff. All of the food that you use in a plant-based diet, it seems to me like the spices, the more fresh they are, the more delicious everything's going to taste. I forgot that I like to put the pepper in freshly ground. So you could do a teaspoon, 2 teaspoons. I have no idea how much I'm doing. If I had more patience, I would even do more because I love freshly ground pepper. But you want to do that. And the one other thing I wanted to mention before I pour the liquid ingredients into the dry ingredients is that really the most time-consuming part of this recipe is pulling out all those spices. And so what I did when I made this up, when I measured these out, was measure everything in here except for the vital wheat gluten. And I can just stick this in my freezer, and next time, everything that we've done, just dump this in here and we're ready for the wet ingredients. So, okay, now, here's where the fun part comes, kind of like preschool. We pour our water in, and this also is a dough that we're not going to knead this dough. We're just going to pull it together. So we're taking a fork here and we're just mixing it around until it all pulls together. And it looks, the reason I mentioned preschool is because it looks a little bit like that homemade dough we made in preschool. And then when you get to this point, it actually starts getting a little spongy, and you can sort of just manipulate it with your hands. And don't tell me your 4-year-olds would not like to do this. Okay, so now we are ready to form this, this dough into sausages. Now it's time to put together Jim Leahy's from Sullivan Street Bakery in Hell's Kitchen in New York, no-knead bread, and it is so delicious and it's so easy. He insists that even a 4-year-old could do this. So if a 4-year-old can do this, we can do this. I've adapted his recipe a little bit to make it a little healthier. I have used 2 cups of white whole wheat flour, and personally I use the King Arthur brand of white whole wheat flour. I have tried some other brands and they just don't perform as well, so that's my favorite. So in this bowl I have 2 cups of white whole wheat flour. Again, the recipe will be included. I have 1 cup of all-purpose flour, and to that I'm going to add a half a teaspoon of instant fast rising yeast. Now this is the kind of yeast, you know, in the stores it's often billed as rapid rise. It's the kind of yeast that does not need hot water to activate it. You want to make sure you get that yeast. And then I'm going to put in here about a teaspoon of salt. But again, if you're on a low salt diet, you can make pane toscano, which has no salt in it at all. So then I'm going to put in 1.5 cups of water. And what I loved about watching Jim do this is that he just used his hand. So I'm going to use mine. And you just play around with it until you get it to form a dough. Now, I don't know how he did it, maybe he oiled his hands beforehand, but I always find that as I do this, a fair amount of the dough sticks to my hand and makes it a little bit difficult to work with. So I just take a butter knife and scrape it off my hands. And of course, it goes without saying that we want to use a knife that is not sharp for this purpose. And scrape, 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 and you release it from your fingers and get most of it back here. And actually I'm finding, and you will find too, that sometimes your dough is just a little bit too wet. So I need to walk over here and find some flour, maybe like right here from something I did earlier today, and put it on here and get this a little more flour onto this dough. So that's it. I mean, that is it. I am not kneading it, I am just getting it to adhere. And typically what I do is rinse out the bowl, but instead, in the interest of time, I'm going to just rinse off my hand and use a clean bowl here. So I have this clean bowl here. I take a paper towel and a little smear of olive oil. This is a great way to coat a bowl with very little olive oil, but just a little smear of olive oil. And I'm going to take my dough and I'm just going to turn it a few times so that it has a tiny bit of oil on it to sort of protect the coat. And that's all I do. Now I'm going to cover it with some plastic wrap and then use a towel to set over the top of it. Oops, I've already got something in this towel. I'm going to use a towel to set over the top of it, and then I'm going to set it on top of the stove. Often if the pilot light is on a stove, that's just perfect. So it's going to attract airborne yeast, and it's going to rise all on its own. You didn't have to knead it, and now you can leave it until whatever time it is the next day when you want to bake it.